Hey there, everyone. Good afternoon. I am very excited for today's performance that's going to happen. It's going to be The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. I did want to give one live shout out because I'm realizing now that, that as these are going out live, there's probably one person listening today, and that's Lewis. And I wanted to say hello, and I'm excited to hear that you are present. Looking forward to feedback later. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into The Telltale Heart. What's exciting about this one? So previously we read The Raven, and that was pretty cool because it had a poetic and rhythmic vibe to it. This one's going to be a lot more disjointed. The cool thing about The Telltale Heart is that it's really written first person narrative style from someone who's completely not with it. It's interesting that Poe writes a lot about things that we would classically treat as horror, but now I'm starting to realize are more mental health. And maybe part of the explanation for how they dealt with mental health was more of the gothic horror style themes, whereas in reality, we're dealing with someone in this story that clearly has some mental health issues. So go ahead and grab yourself a cup of tea if that's what you prefer. I'm in an Earl Grey mood lately. Lemon snaps, usually a nice vibe. Um, but what's cool about this story is that it's so trippy. You're going to get an opportunity to enjoy it any time of day. Before bed, casually reading, on the way to work listening. Like it's a fun step into someone else's mind without it getting too creepy. So I'm going to go ahead just like usual and I'm going to read a little bit of the story and react a little bit. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up in my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as I lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked, I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for several long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound, old man. Indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. I'm going to pause for a second here. This is such a different tone. I mean, it is so nice and refreshing because you can tell that this is a person grappling with what he says is the disease at the beginning, but it's also just a beautiful portrayal of an individual with mental health issues. I unfortunately have family members that are presently struggling through some fairly severe delusions of reality that have been, diagnosed and gone through the mental health system in and out of it, and it's been a really rough transition. But I can only imagine that in their minds, they must think similar to this, that reality is the way they see it. And I think it's so easy to sit on the side and say, oh, well, clearly this person's insane and clearly things are wrong. Right, but he's not talking that way. The narrator's not talking that way, that everything is a mess. He's proud of himself. He's proud that he's able to come up with these thoughts. He's proud that he's able to come up with these plans. And it's so simple. The explanation as to why is so simple for him. Well, clearly I've got to try this. I've got to test it. I've got to build my pattern. I've got to repeat it. I've got to guarantee it works. I've got to see if I can get in there. It's interesting how much logical thought is being put into the practice of executing what he thinks he must do. It's just that the linchpin of all this is that he believes he's got to kill this person to get rid of this eye. Clearly that's the crazy thing for us, but still, what it must be like to be able to be that highly functioning, to be able to plan a murder and yet so delusional that you think you must murder someone because of their physical disability, I want to say, or being disformed. I don't want to denormalize someone that might be in a similar light. So just because of the state of their eye, I'll go ahead and continue. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening, with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. To pause, I do love the tone. He's getting more cynical. He's getting more focused in. He's really after his goal at this point, and it's just beautiful to watch how he's really locked in. And he's just convinced that he's smart. He knows what's going on. He knows what's going to happen. He perfectly understands the execution. I love that sense of delusion. He's still confident, and although this one isn't musical, so to speak, isn't so poetic, isn't so rhythmic as The Raven, you can still tell the style. You can still hear the arrogant reassurance and reassurance. He's repeating himself. He's adding emphasis. He's really trying to nail the points here that he's confident he knows, and he's just repeating the same task. It's night 8. He's got the door open, and there he is looking for the vulture eye. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right back in. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you, what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. Pausing for a second here. It's tripping me up. The casualness of, first of all, I dismember the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, and the legs. Logically, this is clearly what someone must do. But how do you get to that point? I have friends that particularly enjoy murder mysteries or watching the, television programs about true crime. I could never stand it. The idea that someone would murder someone, let alone then have to deal with the consequences of it, I'd be in shambles. I'd be a wreck. And yet here we have a person talking about the dismembering of a corpse. It pulls me out for a second because I find it so difficult to understand. And yet that's what makes it fascinating. That's kind of what makes it interesting. Jumping back in. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too weary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest for their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. I, pausing for a second, absolutely love the confidence. I love the style at this point. I love the individual. It's just being so bold to go through and bring the police in to sit with it. It truly does paint a good picture. And this is what I like about Poe, is that every story is so unique. The characters are truly individuals. And I find this one to be delightful because, yes, he's depraved. Yes, he's insane. But the juxtaposition of the confidence and arrogance faced against what is clearly a deteriorating mental health is beautiful. And you'll see as this goes along that he obviously, and if you've read this before, he completely ruins it for himself. But then again, his world isn't the world that we live in. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But, ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But they still sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until, at length, I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Edgar Allen Poe, January 1843. I love that experience. To say that it's nice to listen to is one thing, but to read it is absolutely beautiful. It really is a pleasure to just enjoy those moments of living it out by reading it. It's so much fun. I am going to, every day at noon, when possible, and the schedule may change, but every day at noon I'm going to be reading another story. I'd like to focus on Edgar Allan Poe right now because it's just such a fun, visceral experience to read. It's not only fun to listen to Poe, but to read out loud, truly an enjoyable experience. I challenge all of you out there that are listening, either live or listening afterwards, to pick up a volume of his unabridged works, pick up a volume of any author that you like for that matter. Go out there and enjoy it. Have fun reading. Have fun reading it aloud. Have fun reading it aloud with others, and get back to the joy that we're supposed to have from this medium and this experience. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for those that showed up. Thank you for those that came afterwards. And I'll talk to you